Geek Therapy Radio.
So my guest today is Matt Farah of TheSmokingTire. He's been on the show once or twice, but it's been a couple years. Matt, how you been doing?
Good, thank you very much. How you doing, Johnny?
I'm all right. I see that you got married recently, so congratulations, mazel tov on that.
Thank you. Not that recently. It's been 2 years. We had our anniversary on 420, but I guess it's been a while since we spoke. Yeah. No, my wife rules.
Yes. Recently since we last spoke. I actually got married recently, quote unquote.
Oh, congratulations.
Well. Thank you very much, and nice. Congrats on the anniversary and everything like that. We had our first kiddo, Riker.
Oh, well.
He's 6 months old.
Riker, like the island?
I didn't think about that one naming him, but it was more Riker from Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
You know,
as I'm not a Star Trek guy, so I missed that one too.
That's fine. Right, he can be Riker Island.
Exclusive meanings.
Exactly. He could be Riker Island too. Whatever.
Yeah.
Where is Riker Island, by the way? Is that off of
New York City?
Yeah. I was going to say East Coast somewhere, and then you got The Rock out there off of coast of California.
That would be in San Francisco, yeah.
Exactly, but we're not here to talk about The Rock or prisons. I mean, who knows?
Really? We can talk about prisons all day. I mean, I'm good on prisons all day.
Sure.
I could do an hour. An hour just on prisons.
Yeah. Well, okay, speaking of legal ramifications, what's crazy is that after I called you out for an interview, like a day later, there was a Tesla crash in my neck of the woods, just a few minutes away in the Woodlands, Texas, which is just a little bit north of downtown Houston. And it's kind of, you're vocal about Tesla on Twitter, and I think that's good.
Sure.
That we keep these car companies to a higher standard, because we don't have the rose-colored glasses that I think a lot of people do. And I'll just say it, there's kind of a cult-ish following around Tesla, and Tesla and Elon Musk can do no wrong, except that people die when they take advantage of this Autopilot, which... what do you think of the name Autopilot?
I think it's an incredibly misleading name that is borderline fraudulent.
Yeah.
I understand that there's a technicality in that, planes and boats use a autopilot system that is actually quite similar to what an adaptive radar cruise control system uses, whereas it will steer and guide the course of the plane or the boat to a certain degree.
Right.
Not all the way, to
right.
a certain degree. And I've flown a plane one time, but I use boats a lot, so I know a lot about autopilots. And from an extremely technical sense, sure. And a level 2 advanced driver's aid system, such as Tesla's Autopilot, in certain highly specific circumstances, can do most of the steering.
Right.
The problem is that other companies do two things that Tesla doesn't do. One is they restrict where you can use level 2 semi-autonomous features. For instance, Cadillac will only allow you to use their Super Cruise feature on clearly marked single direction travel roads, like really well marked interstates and stuff like that. And they also include something called a driver monitoring system, also known as a DMS, which basically is a camera, a camera plus some sensors that look back at the driver to ensure that the driver's focus is on the road and not on their phone or looking out the side window or reading a book or sleeping or perhaps not even in the seat at all.
Yeah.
In lieu of a driver monitoring system, Tesla uses a torque sensor on the wheel that is supposed to ensure that your hands are touching the wheel for the majority of the time that the system is engaged. The problem is that system is incredibly easy to defeat.
Right.
And in fact, enthusiasts of Tesla and forum users of Tesla will simultaneously post on Twitter about how, only real idiots would be confused by this system and it's their own fault for being stupid. And then, simultaneously share ways to defeat, that system.
Right.
So it's really it's just this sort of wink way of looking at everything. And it's incredibly unsafe.
Yeah.
It's just incredibly unsafe. That a company would allow this type of heavily betaed technology to be released to the general public.
Right.
I think is wild.
And people are dying. Why do you think Elon has been so kind of tight-lipped? I mean, I think I know why, but what's your opinion on that?
It's very obvious why. It's obvious why. It's because he's very good at what to say and what not to say, so that he can imply that the vehicles either are or are about to be self-driving,
right?
That they are capable of self-driving in their current state, and but at the same time refer to the fine print, at the same time refer to some error, a person who has not lived up to the agreement or whatever, and use some incredibly misleading facts,
right,
that say that this system is, quote, safer than the average, than some hypothetical average driver.
Right.
In my opinion, these are all incredibly cynical and misleading things to do, and they're being done in order to maintain an artificially inflated stock price, and they're done against a backdrop of presumed improvements in safety. But there's no such thing as breaking a few eggs,
right,
when it comes to safety.
And we'll take just a little break from the conversation with Matt Farah for radio reasons. If you're listening to the podcast, this will be instantaneous. But you should go to The Smoking Tire on YouTube, The Smoking Tire on YouTube, and hit the subscribe button. Also subscribe to The Smoking Tire podcast. Subscribe to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast on YouTube while we're at it. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. My guest is Matt Farah of The Smoking Tire. Go subscribe to The Smoking Tire on YouTube and also subscribe to The Smoking Tire podcast. We've been talking about Tesla and we've been holding no punches, especially Matt. Not holding any punches against Tesla and Autopilot and that whole debacle. So let's continue the conversation right now.
If you're going to improve safety, then you must improve safety at each step of the way. You don't get to say, I'm going to do this really dangerous thing and release it to the public in the name of safety for some hypothetical thing. Tesla's marketing of this system is both incredibly misleading in a wink way, but also offers the company deniability to blame the individual when something goes wrong.
So I was going to use an A word that's fairly strong, and I would say egregious. And to me, what I mean by egregious in this example that I'm about to give you is that apparently, and I will double check this before I publish this, that apparently in the literature of Tesla's Autopilot, it says Autopilot, blah, 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 is not fully autonomous or whatever. It's like, but you called it Autopilot and then you say it's not autonomous. So why are you calling it Autopilot? That's incredibly misleading.
Yeah, and they also, they also sell a package for $10,000 called the full self-driving hardware suite.
Yeah.
And, and the news media is complicit. They refer to Teslas as self-driving a lot, and people are just dumb. I mean, I hear people repeat all the time. It's not true. And it just, it's very frustrating. The truth will never keep up with someone who's lying in a very exciting and fun way.
Yeah.
And everyone, everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people that support. There is a financial incentive to go along with the ruse.
Right.
If you are an actual investor in Tesla, the company, then you are incentivized financially to not say this is dangerous, this is not real, this is actually what they've done is make something that has the appearance of a self-driving car at first glance, but actually really doesn't do any of the things that you would actually need a self-driving car to do in order to call it a self-driving car.
Right.
Yeah.
So I hate using this phrase, but we're talking about cars switching gears a little bit, even though EVs don't really have many forward gears, so to speak.
Taycan's got two.
The Taycan does? Wow. So the torque, how does that must be some sort of major feat of engineering to handle all that torque and convert it between gears. I've always understood the EVs to have such tremendous torque that if you don't have a beefy setup or the right thing going on there, it can snap a drive shaft if you're switching gears too quickly.
Right. I mean, Porsche, has their PDK gearbox holds more torque than the Taycan makes.
Oh, wow.
From a gas powered car, but it's only on the rear, the 2-speed gearbox, and it's a high gear. So basically, you're driving around in first gear, or what you'd call low gear, at city speeds, and then it switches into high gear around I don't know, maybe like
20.
60 or so. It depends.
Okay.
Well, it depends on no. It depends on the throttle position and a bunch of other stuff too. But it does have 2 gears. Is the point, and it doesn't break itself to use them, which is good.
Do you think we'll ever get to the point, if we haven't already, something that probably I don't know, that we might have 3 pedals in an EV? A clutch, 5 gears, 6 gears?
I don't know about necessarily in the production car world. I don't think that the buyers of EVs and the buyers of manual cars necessarily want those 2 things. But I do know that in the custom world, there are a lot of folks that are pairing EV motors with manual gearboxes, and it's totally possible and totally doable. And although and you don't have to press the clutch in when you come to a stop, which is nice. You do use the clutch to change from one gear to the next, but you don't have to press it to come to a stop because you can't stall an electric car. So that's pretty cool.
Right.
I've seen it in some Porsches and some other stuff like that. So the EV production cars are exciting at the very high end. The Taycan, and I just drove the Taycan Cross Turismo, which is the wagon one that's got a bit of a lift on it.
Nice.
It's very cool.
Shoot and brake.
Cool. Yeah. And yes, lovely car. And I just personally bought the Mach-E, the Ford Mach-E. So for me and my wife to use the daily driver. So we're really enjoying that car.
Is that your first EV daily?
Yes, ish. I had a Volt. I had a first gen Volt in 2013.
I've got a
Bolt. Although that's a hybrid. Yeah, I mean, I looked at a Bolt. It didn't. The seats weren't great for me. I have a trashed back, but I love the Mach-E. And when I had my Volt back in the day, I really liked my Volt. It was, although it was a hybrid, not an EV, I plugged it in every day and I used it predominantly as an EV, and I thought it was fabulous.
Right.
So, but there's a lot of interesting things going on in the world of custom EV car building here in California. A lot of people are taking, very charming but somewhat underpowered / unreliable cars, from the 50s and 60s, and looking to do EV powertrain conversions. And it seems like the going rate for your average EV conversions around $50,000 retail here in California.
50.
So 50.
50.
Yeah, 50.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, depending on where you go and who does it and, what parts you're using, and I'm sure the cost swings wildly. But I've had a couple of my customers here at Westside Collector Car Storage, which is my day job, A couple of my customers ask about converting, some old car they were sitting around. People are typically asking about charming stuff, Fiat 500s, Volkswagen microbuses and bogs, stuff like that. Yeah. Stuff that looks cool, but where the powertrain is not particularly inspiring.
So that's a good transition to one of my last questions for you. I really wanted to dish on this. The world of resto mods, that can be a touchy subject for a lot of purists, but the more I think about it, as you remember, we're DeLorean brothers. I know you don't still have your DeLorean, but I like to keep mine as close to stock as possible. But the more I think about it, the more I think that an EV conversion, to put a 60 kilowatt or 100 kilowatt battery, whatever powertrain in there, I think for the DeLorean and almost the entire community of DeLorean owners, that an EV conversion would be acceptable. Whereas you might think like an old like 70 Mustang Fastback, something like that, and you talk, I want to do an EV conversion. You might have some people in that group, possibly, or groups like that might have some pushback. Ultimately, you can do whatever you want, but do you think there are cars, this is the interesting discussion here, do you think there are cars that the community will be more open-armed to EV conversions, and do you think there are cars that leave that 4-barrel carb, leave that 350 Cleveland in there, like a Pantera? Do you think a Pantera would be a good candidate for an EV mod?
No. No, I don't. I mean, look, you're asking a couple of different questions. You're asking, what do I think would be a good candidate for an EV mod? You're also asking what I think various communities might think about EV mods.
Right.
The truth is, I think you could break down what various communities think about EV mods probably more regionally than you can by fans of any particular make and model of vehicle. I think you could bring almost anything to a Cars and Coffee in LA that was converted to EV, and people will find it pretty cool. There's a guy named Busy Ezrioja, who has a company called Bisimoto here in LA, and they've been building very big power cars for a while, but they just started doing EV stuff, and they're building these Porsche 935s, crazy. They look like they're Le Mans cars from the late 70s or early 80s. Nice. But they're EVs, and they have the Tesla motors and whatnot, and they go pretty fast, and they don't weigh all that much, and they're real cool.
I love talking to Matt. He makes me work during the editing phase. Go subscribe to The Smoking Tire on YouTube and The Smoking Tire podcast and the Geek Therapy Radio podcast, and we'll be right back with more Matt Farah. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I've been talking with Matt Farah of The Smoking Tire. So that's The Smoking Tire on YouTube and The Smoking Tire podcast. Make sure you go subscribe to both. We've been talking about what is and isn't a good candidate for an EV conversion. Should you convert an old Mustang to an EV? Should you convert an old Volkswagen to an EV? Let's pick up that conversation.
I think there are other folks that feel that EVs are inevitable in terms of our daily drivers, and so why take this thing that feels old and try to make it new, and not use it to stay in touch with the old times and the old feelings and what have you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just want people to be happy with their car. And so if someone's got an old Bug or an old Fiat 500, I think the microbus is a particularly good example, because microbuses are 99% about how they look and 1% about the fact that they have an air-cooled flat 4 engine. Like, I get that the Beetle is got a little bit of, air-cooled, okay, the relationship with Porsche and air-cooled, like, all right, I get it, but I don't know. I don't give a shit about the van and whether it's air-cooled. It's a terrible powertrain. It's extremely sluggish. And so and a minivan in general, a cool retro minivan is a great candidate to me for a EV conversion, because the engine sucked anyway, right? And you've got that whole floor to work with for batteries and stuff. You got a lot of room, and and no one really cares if you add 500 pounds to a microbus.
Right.
And so I think stuff like that, or stuff like big old caddies, that that could be cool. Or I'm about it. I'm not like, let's all stop modding gas cars and do EVs. It's a niche thing. But I think if there's a car, I wouldn't take apart a perfectly good classic car to convert it to an EV.
Right.
But if there's a car that is either dead or revived by going EV, well, it's better to have it revived, isn't it?
Right.
Than for it to die.
And I agree.
But ultimately, what I want is for people to be happy with whatever they've got, and I don't care what you want to drive as long as it doesn't somehow impact me in a negative way, But as long as it doesn't, as long as you're happy, like I don't, it doesn't need to be in line with my priorities for a car at all. I don't care. As
long as they cruise to Cars and Coffee with the driver in the driver's seat and not both of them in the back seat.
Yeah, I mean, look, are those two people very stupid? And they're dead, and you hate to talk bad about dead people like this.
Right.
But were they very stupid? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But does that mean that because they were very stupid that Tesla has no culpability? It absolutely doesn't mean that at all.
Right.
And all you have to do to find out if Tesla has culpability or not is go, okay, these people were dumb. Yes, this is an understood. The plaintiff and the defendant both accept that these were dumb people. Fine.
Right.
If they were in any other car besides a Tesla, would they have attempted this?
Right.
And the answer is obviously no.
Nope.
And now you just go, well, why wouldn't they attempt it in any other car?
Right. Because it says Autopilot.
Because this feature is marketed as being able to drive the car without you thing. Exactly. And it's marketed that way right until something goes bad, and then they pull back. And it's marketed that way right until they have to do a filing with the California Department of Motor Vehicles or with NHTSA or whatever, and then the paperwork does not say what they're out there saying in the news and saying in the presentations and saying on Twitter. That it doesn't line up. And in some ways, it's a lot like what happened in between November and January, where these political actors went out into the news media and said, fraud, stolen, fraud, stolen. Mm-hmm. And then the lawyers actually went to court, and when they came time to talk in front of the judge, they went, no, we're not actually saying that. We're not actually saying it.
Right.
And if you read the transcripts of the court cases, it's when none of them, when they actually got to court, really tried to say it was. And so the same thing. I don't want to make a big political thing out of it, but with Tesla, you have the same thing where in the marketing it's one thing, and in the courtroom or in the paperwork and in the regulatory, it's another.
Yeah.
And in the marketing angle, they have created a vehicle that has the same advanced driver's aid safety features that are offered on Cadillac. I mean, exactly the same. Mm-hmm. And very similar to what's offered on Audi and Mercedes. Though I would say their system is better in my personal anecdotal experience than Audi and Mercedes, but it's not as good as Cadillac's. But in order to give the appearance of a self-driving car, they do not restrict where you can activate the system. They let you activate it anywhere.
Right. And
that, in my opinion, is very, very dangerous and very irresponsible. And then, if also forget not being in the driver's seat, because that's gullibility combined with stupidity, combined with buying into the hero worship of this person who's done something that they haven't actually done.
Right.
Now let's say there's someone in the driver's seat. Forget the scenario that just happened. But here's another scenario that's happened several times, and there's lots of evidence. Person is in the driver's seat. Autopilot is engaged on the freeway. There is a semi-truck crossing the freeway.
Yeah.
That, as we know, this system has a real hard time seeing right now. Okay.
Right.
Person is reading the newspaper, doing something they shouldn't be doing on their phone. They look up just in time to see that a crash is imminent.
Right.
But what do? You panic, right? You person about to have a crash in the car, you panic.
Yeah.
You stand on the brakes, grab the steering wheel, and you try to avoid the crash as best you can, right? Mm-hmm. Well, what you've done there is you've deactivated the system.
Right.
And you have gotten into the crash and
right.
not the computer. So Tesla would call that your fault.
Yep.
Not their. Now, let's say you didn't deactivate the system. Let's say the system was operating the whole time and crashed into the truck, and you didn't deactivate the system. Well, now it's your fault because you weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And if you were paying attention, you would have avoided the crash.
It's kind of beautiful.
The user is now responsible in both scenarios.
Right.
So the thing about safety features in cars and stuff like this that is in theory built on the backdrop of safety is that, like I said, it has to be safer at every step of the way.
Right.
It can't be more dangerous now in order to get to a theoretical safer later. And oh, by the way, in the meantime, you're going to trade your freedoms.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you're talking about a truly autonomous vehicle where you get in and plug in a destination and then you read a book and the car takes you there, level 5.
Yep.
If you're talking about that type of scenario, your data is incredibly integrated in that system.
Yeah.
And if that system, in order to work, has to be integrated with all the other cars' systems, which has to be integrated with the traffic lights, which has to be integrated with all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
Imagine the opportunity for surveillance capitalism there. You know, we already make the assumption that like Waze knows the best way because of if we become so reliant on Waze and these systems to navigate us around the quote best way. Well, what's to stop high bidders from let's say I've been looking at this Ralph Lauren jacket on Google Shopping the last 2 weeks, and oh wow, let's say that they're going to route me right past the store. Oh my God, and they're having a sale too.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so the opportunities there to extract money and data from the user under the guise of some kind of safety, you know, and you never know because of a hacking situation, a political situation, or some other kind of situation. You might be in a position where you ask your car to take you somewhere and it says no. Yeah. You know?
Right.
And think about the last 20 minutes of any post-apocalyptic future movie. It involves the hero wrestling control away from an autonomous car or discovering some old disconnected analog car, you know, buried somewhere and using that device to save the day. I mean, that's not that far-fetched.
We'll pause the conversation right there, and I know it sounds like we're just kind of joking, but like Matt said, it's really not that far-fetched. You could be at home preparing dinner, accidents happen, maybe your dog bumps your leg, and you never know what you're going to have to ask your car to do. It could sound something like this. Alexa, I've been stabbed with a steak knife. Take me to the hospital.
I'm sorry that's not included with Prime membership, but good luck with your bleeding artery.
Yep. We'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio, the final segment of Geek Therapy Radio. My guest this week has been Matt Farah. Be sure to subscribe to The Smoking Tire, both on YouTube and the podcast. So, The Smoking Tire podcast and The Smoking Tire on YouTube. And I'll go ahead and plug my stuff too. If you're listening to the radio, you can always subscribe to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player. You can also subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube as well, or visit me at geektherapyradio.com. Let's continue the conversation with Matt Farah. At the end of the day, I think I share kind of your I had this optimistic view. I would like for it to be more optimistic than it might be, and maybe it will still be optimistic. So along the lines of the EV conversions and all that, and then we're talking all the autonomy and the different levels of autonomy and selling your data, and you just looked at a Ralph Lauren ad, now it's going to route you by Ralph Lauren, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I still want the ability. I don't want it to ever become illegal to get into a car from 1965 that is not connected to jack squat, and I still want to be able to cruise it down the freeway.
Right. My friend Alex Roy has started the Human Driving Association, which is not much more than a Twitter account right now, but I recommend giving them a follow.
Sure.
It may in short order become a lobbying group for the rights of human drivers, which is something you probably never thought you'd have to say, but it's important. I'm not selling my old manual transmission gas cars anytime soon.
Right.
Look, and it's not to say that like I'm not anti-EV. And by the way, EV and connected car and autonomous features are kind of merging into one thing, but they don't have to be.
Right.
You know, I wasn't as anti-Tesla as I am now until he started lying about the cars driving themselves. When they just built good-looking, fast electric cars, I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
And I still think that is cool. And I don't like hate Tesla as the car.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not, I just think that what the company's doing is incredibly sketchy and incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
And that NHTSA and the other agencies that are right, a lot of people, they want to assume that the world is running as it should.
Yeah.
And that if what this company was doing was so terrible, well, the government would just shut it down, right? The agencies would shut it down, right? Like they wouldn't just get away with this. Well, a story just came out in the LA Times that for the last 5 years or so, NHTSA was just completely asleep at the wheel regarding what Tesla's been doing and selling to customers, and the types of oversight that really should be being done and are not being done regarding the sale of this type of technology on the street. And I'm not talking about because it's so good that people shouldn't have it. I'm talking about because it's so bad that you need a professional person whose job it is to be monitoring it, not general public.
Right.
And unfortunately, the longer it goes on, the more that the consumer will expect that this is just the way.
Yeah.
I saw there was a little Twitter spat between Jim Farley from Ford and Elon Musk, and Jim Farley pretty much threw some shade at him and said, we're about testing their products in-house, not the beta testing, and a lot of the replies from Tesla people were like, you're going to sell something that you're not letting us test first. And it's like, yeah. We're not, we're supposed to be testing it. We're the manufacturer. Like, you're not, it should be. Yeah. So anyway, it's going to be, unless the regulatory agencies, the consumer advocacy groups, really step up and make sure that these types of features are really marketed honestly, in good faith, and there is not a financial reinforcement for spreading lies about what the capabilities are of this system. So I think we're going to have a messy few years.
Yep. So to wrap this up here, because I know your time is short, but you just reminded me of something. I think a lot of the times the way something is monikered has more weight than the companies realize, or whoever the talking head realizes. So, for instance, the other day we were watching. I don't think it's before more than they realize. I think they realize exactly how much it is. They just have deniability. But go on. Yes. So I was watching the other day. There is the rise in the past year or so of Asian hate crimes against Asians. And the other day I was thinking, like, why is this a thing? Turns out people listen to leaders. Exactly. Turns out calling it the China virus and Kung flu and Wuhan flu and stuff like that. Turns out dumb people are going to be doing dumb things when you call something a dumb thing. You call something autopilot, people are going to be dumb with it and crash into trees. Or there's a term I will leave you with, and it's a term that I learned
and it's called stochastic terror.
Okay.
Have you ever heard that term before? Stochastic terror is a term I learned. It was referring to the Trump administration, but it also works and it's worked in other places in history. Mm-hmm. It's basically where you don't have to do the terrible thing.
Right.
You just create an environment where it is very likely that these terrible things will happen.
Right.
And they will happen in such a way that is imbalanced more towards the people you don't like.
Right.
And it'll still happen enough to both sides, and it'll happen distanced enough from you that you will be able to call people crazy or mentally disturbed or lone wolf actors or whatever. But the stochastic part of it is that you have intentionally created an environment where, if in political terms, it's you create an environment where basically pseudo-terroristic violence will happen. Mm-hmm. In Tesla terms, you've created an environment where what I would call predictable abuse of the system will happen. It is easily predictable within the company that the system would be abused in that way, and they have taken no steps to really actively prevent the system from being abused in that way. And so that's the stochastic thing applying to Tesla.
And Tesla doesn't advertise. Maybe there's some very dark kind of notion.
That's horse too. Saying we don't advertise, just they use that term extremely technically to mean they don't buy print and TV ads. They sent a car into space.
Yeah.
They do all kinds of stunts for marketing purposes. They work with all kinds of influencers.
Right.
You know, they engage with people. They like to set themselves up to be some kind of other and say it's everyone's against us. And, you know, they don't engage with mainstream media. They then put out their own statements that are not really, you can't really fact check them properly because they don't engage with the media. And it's just, you know, it's dictator's playbook.
Yep. I think he knows what he's doing. I think he's very, very aware.
He learned from really bad people, like really terrible people.
Right.
Who he's figured out how to, you know, if you read the book or watch the documentary on Theranos, the blood thing.
Okay.
I mean, it's just, or even the documentary on HBO, which was called The Lady in the Dale, going back to the 70s. This is not a new thing where a charlatan has come up with one cool thing and then gotten a round of investments, and then had to come up with the next cool thing, and eventually they don't have any more hits, so they start making them up.
Right.
and that's what full self-driving is. It's a made up charade. The cars can't do it. The cars won't be able to do it, but you can buy in now.
Yep.
For the low, you know.
Yeah. $10,000 per more. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on, Matt. Do you want to plug anything real quick on your way out that you haven't already?
If you like what I said here, listen to me every week, twice a week on the Smoking Tire podcast, and I review cars on the Smoking Tire YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt. And that was the one and only Matt Farah. Who else could it have possibly been? Go check out the Smoking Tire YouTube channel and the Smoking Tire podcast. Like you just mentioned, you can grab the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast player if you're not already listening to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast right now. Be sure to share the Geek Therapy Radio podcast with your friends. I don't ask that too often, but I really should. Also, if you listen to Geek Therapy Radio podcast on Apple Podcasts, drop a star rating or a review. I'm not telling you 5 stars or what to say in the review, but if you feel so led, you know, drop a star on there or 5. Maybe leave a review. But most importantly, know that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love, no matter what anybody says, and you're also worthy of your own self-respect. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to sponsor Geek Therapy Radio, just go to geektherapyradio.com and let's talk.